We are happy to take questions at any time. We're just going to be going through what's been happening in Chicago. I'm guessing you guys are aware that Chuy Garcia forced Mayor Emanuel into a runoff. We were some early members of the team, and we did everything from the branding to identity to the website to social media to email marketing. So we're going to talk about some of the things we learned and just the kind of political climate in Chicago. We've been learning, talking to people, that there are a lot of similarities to things that are happening in New York. So feel free to stop us at any time and ask questions. We do have a number of videos that we're going to show as well. So if you get really bored by them because it's contextual Chicago, just let us know and we can skip through them. So,
and we have some of the last Chuy buttons, which people will get. Oh. These are on eBay now. These are like between $50 a piece. So if you ask a particularly good question, or these are potential rewards.
Or say the magic word, which we will not tell you what it is until it is said. We don't have any of them. The mustache ones are all gone. There are several mustache variations, though. Cool. So we're gonna get started, and some of you might not be too familiar with Chuy, so we wanted to start off by just showing him in action. I think when he was
first we want to gauge.
Oh yeah. Some questions about.
First we want to gauge how many people have been. Is my mic still? Yeah. How many people have been following Raise your hand if you were following Chuy's campaign. How many people have been following it closely? How many people know who Patrick Fitzmorris is? Okay.
So how many have you been following closely?
So we're going to start just giving you an idea what Chuy looks like in action.
The Great Recession caused massive foreclosures that our communities are still hurting from. I resent that. We'll change that. Every time when I step out of my house, you know what I look at? I look at an abandoned building on my block. And I know that you have vacant buildings where you come out and you see them. That's a sign of disinvestment and neglect. Our agenda will be to change that, to devise strategies together with you to figure out how we revitalize our community. We will stop the flow of tax increment financing dollars to corporate people who are connected with City Hall. Those are our tax dollars. We deserve an accounting for them, and we deserve to say how they will be utilized. We will shine the light on those dollars because it's $1.7 billion of our tax dollars, and they're hard-earned. So, ladies and gentlemen, they said we were demoralized. Brothers and sisters, they said that we couldn't reach across those barriers, that people in Chicago couldn't come across race, couldn't reach out across faith, couldn't reach out across ethnicities. But as I look out here tonight, I see all of Chicago here. I see Chicago big time here. Yes. I see it ready to take back our city. I see Chicago saying, I have ideas. I see people saying, I am important. I see people saying, I will be counted. And I need your help. We need to bring in a robust vote on February the 24th. We need to re-elect the good members of the city council who have shown a commitment to people. And we need to elect some fresh blood also so that we have a working majority in the city council. Yes. We all must be held accountable. That is a part of participatory democracy. That is what transparent is all about. So as we get ready to take...
That's just to give you a general idea of what, that was a youth rally on the south side. I think first we need to tell you kind of that we're primarily going to talk about the general election, which got us into the runoff, was when Andy and I were most heavily involved. These are the major candidates from left to right. We got Rahm Emanuel. Pretty much know who Rahm Emanuel is. He closed 50 schools. He raised about $40 million for his campaign. Bob Fioretti, who's an independent alderman, progressive alderman, he ran. He started running about 6 months before the general election. Then Chuy Garcia, Doc Walls is a perennial, actually, we got him in the wrong order here. Willie Wilson, who's a preacher, gospel singer, multimillionaire. He made like $60 million from McDonald's franchises and a medical supply company. But he came from Mississippi. His father was a sharecropper, that type of thing. And then Doc Walls, who's been a perennial candidate. He's gotten 1% of the vote since 1992 or something like that. These were the issues based on our polling. Violence was number one. In low-income neighborhoods, the number of police have been reduced by Emanuel, and lots of shootings in the parks of the neighborhoods. The whole nature of the gangs have changed from a fairly strong structure. You know, as the price of dope goes down, the gang leaders have not been able to hold their networks together. And so the pay of your neighborhood drug dealer has dropped almost not much more above minimum wage. Discipline within the gangs is decreased. Means a lot more local fights. You know, grandparents used to take their kids to play in the park. They can't anymore. It's the number one issue in lower income neighborhoods. Next is school closings. This is Sean Johnson, who's kind of a hero during the school closings. He made a video. This is him speaking at a rally of parents and teachers in Daly Plaza. He made he didn't know he was going to speak, but they asked him to get up and speak. They made a video of it. They posted it on YouTube. He had 250,000 views within 24 hours. He was on Letterman. He was on national TV. He and his mother. He actually made several videos for us also. He's real sharp. He's now 10 years old, 5th grade, 10 or 11. 11 in 5th grade, real sharp kid. We put him together. We're not going to show you the video unless you really want us to later, but we put him together with a 96, the oldest Chuy supporter, 96-year-old Timber Black, and the youngest Chuy supporter, and made some videos with him. And then obviously jobs, economic development are major issues, especially in low-income communities, and they affect education, they affect crime, they're at the root of pretty much every issue. And then way at the bottom, were, in terms of the perception of the general public, was debt and revenue. But as you'll find out, the Tribune, you know, the conservative editorial boards of the Tribune, Sun-Times, and many of the television stations made this the number one issue, and we'll get into it a little later, but they kept asking Chuy, even though Rahman's been running the city for 4 years and things have gotten worse, they expect Chuy to say how he's going to solve the problems before the election even starts. This gives you a little idea of the demographics. The blue areas are white neighborhoods. The orange areas are Hispanic neighborhoods. The green areas are black neighborhoods. Much of the white areas in the middle towards the lake are the Loop, very affluent areas where many of the big businesses are, the trading firms, the big banks, that type of thing. And Chuy was an accidental candidate. Karen Lewis, the CTU president, was going to run. She got a brain tumor. She was in the hospital. She asked Chuy to run, so he only had about 3 weeks to get enough petitions to get on the ballot. Chuy had a long history. Anyone here know about Harold Washington? Most of you are too young to know about Harold Washington. Chuy was a pivotal person in giving Harold Washington a majority, the ability to pass legislation in the mid-'80s. He was elected, basically, the courts forced redistricting because Latinos and African Americans were underrepresented in the city council. After their redistricting, Chuy and 3 other Latinos were elected progressive aldermen that gave Harold Washington the ability to pass legislation. Harold had the tying vote, and they had what they called the Verdoliak Nine. Ed Burke, Eddie Verdoliak, and a bunch of conservative white aldermen were just like the Republicans and Obama now, that refused to pass any legislation whatsoever, including budget legislation. So when Chuy got elected, Harold Washington could make decisions. He had to do a big property tax increase in order to pay the accumulated debts, and Chuy would be criticized for voting for that tax increase later. So I got a call a Saturday night, right, I think it was about November, yeah, about November 10th, November 11th, from Don Rose. He's old. He ran the Jane Byrne campaign. He was an advisor to Harold Washington. He helped organize the '63 March on Washington. He helped organize the '63 school boycott in Chicago. Schools were strictly segregated. And he's been an activist. He's run many, many campaigns, been an activist. He called me. I've known him for about 30 years. We used to play poker together and that type of thing. Called me and asked, and we worked on some campaigns together. Called me and asked if I'd work on Chuy's campaign. And I said, well, I'll think about it, but we got to know he's got a chance of winning, and we've got to have some power to help frame issues and that type of thing. We don't want to run, a typical campaign, and he assured us that we would. And so we had a meeting in with Andrew Sharp in Don's apartment. Andrew Sharp was the campaign manager. He'd kind of been drafted into being the campaign manager. Andy, me, another guy, Manny, who's Chuy's chief of staff. So we had, 5 people? And we just basically, they tried to convince us to work with them. And a couple of days, maybe a week later or so, we decided we were. That was kind of the heart of the campaign, 5 or 6 people at the beginning. The first thing we did is Chuy's son, Chava, had created a Facebook page, a website. What else?
Twitter, Instagram, just the basic marketing channels.
Yeah. And this was not his field. He's a student at the University of Minnesota. He didn't really have time. So we came in, and our first question is, people call Chuy. When he was younger, they called him Jesse. And his branding was Jesus Garcia initially, so it was like Garcia for mayor, this type of thing. We wanted to position him as leading a movement, and we wanted Chuy is a common, people named Jesus are commonly called Chuy in Mexican-American neighborhoods. And was occasionally called Chuy, but Chuy was much better from a marketing point of view. You could make it big on a button. When you do chants, like Harold Washington was Harold. Chuy is Chuy. So we just, remember, there was a very small group of people, 5 people plus Chuy. So things we suggested didn't have to go through 12. So we would just do something, and Chuy would look at it and he'd say, seems okay. And then 6 weeks later, he'd be talking about how he was never called Chuy before, but now he got in this campaign, and now he's Chuy, and all this kind of stuff. Also, he'll be a mayor for all Chicagoans, so you know that Harold Washington, Rahm Emanuel is mayor 1%, friends with the billionaires and millionaires. He himself worked for a Wall Street investment firm and made, $15 million in about a year. And he did a big deal for Bruce Rauner, who's now the governor. And I think Rauner made, how big a deal was it? Like that? No, more than that, $300 million from Rauner. And Rahm got substantial commission off of that. And they go vacationing together. They drink $1,000 bottles of wine together. So one evidence there really was a movement, and Chuy referred this throughout the campaign, is about 1,000 volunteers came out of the woodwork to collect 63,000 signatures for him. You were required to get 12,500 signatures, and this is Chuy got 63,000, Emmanuel got 43,000. Wilson, who was very popular in the black community, got 43,000. And really, most of the volunteers to collect the petitions came from Latino neighborhoods and from progressive white neighborhoods on the northwest side, Logan Square, places like that. And they really did, and they're, Clem Balanoff, Tom Balanoff's cousin. Tom Balanoff runs Local 1 in SEIU, and he was also involved in the International quite a few years ago. Clem Balanoff was in charge of collecting the signatures. He was real scrupulous in terms of making sure they were clean. So we weren't challenged. This is a picture of all the ballots being delivered. And the guy with the blue, that's Clem Balanoff there in the blue raincoat. So this is an example of some of the donations. The Tribune did a story that basically 60 of Rahm's top donors got favors back in business for their companies, this type of thing. So it's a real pay-to-play. Since Rahm controls the Ethics Commission, pretty much everything, he got the Ethics Commission to approve him receiving donations from the people managing the teachers' pension fund and the other city worker pension funds, that type of thing. So the general election was about anyone but Rahm. It was a referendum on Rahm. This is a button I made, but we couldn't distribute it as the Garcia campaign, so I talked to people in Chicago, all over the country, progressive organizations, trying to get them to print them and distribute them on L-tracks and everything. We're trying to get younger people involved. We weren't able to get millennials to vote, or Latinos to vote in significant numbers, and we thought maybe an anyone but Rahm campaign would get younger people thinking about the election. Yeah, it's kind of anti-politics, so maybe they would wear, but I could get anyone. It was always a little too lower priority for some of the national groups to, they were willing to spend the money, but they weren't willing to divert their people to distribute the buttons. So this is the first time publicly anyone's known that we tried to do this. Yeah.
I was just thinking about maybe why that might be. Maybe if Rahm's name is bigger, like no to Rahm or something, maybe it would be something maybe people could easily connect with and might have worked. I don't know if you evaluated it later. I was just thinking as you were talking about,
So
ABR might have been lost.
yeah. So the question was maybe if the ROM was bigger, it would have been more self-evident that was the intent of it. Yeah. So there was a lot of that stuff. When we'll talk about this in a second, but with just user-generated content, I think people kind of just made it their own. There was a fire ROM campaign that had a little crown on the F, and that was posted across the south side.
Jonathan Jackson ran that, Jesse Jackson's son.
And there are a number of Rahm has a number of iconic images of him like thumbing his nose, or him as a ballet student, and those were used against him as well. But this was something that specifically we wanted to do because it was obvious that it was a vote for a specific candidate necessarily at the beginning. It was just voting Rahm out.
Well, I had a specific reason for having the initials instead of the name. That if we knew from Chuy was at an L station or a bus stop at 7 o'clock in the morning, 7 to 8, no matter what the weather. And I was with him sometimes. Clem was with him. My girlfriend was with him more times than I was. And millennials would be walking, with their pack, their computer, all that kind of stuff, and they would see us, and they would shield their bodies, and they would walk around us like that, like politics was poison. So I'm serious. This happened all the time. And so we figured if we had an ABR button, someone would have to get close to them and ABR stand for, and then they might actually get in a conversation. But if it was wrong, you could see it was political, and you would stay away. Huh? No, well, Chuy had his standard palm cards and that type of thing. Yeah. Oh, this never happened. The ABR thing never happened. This is something we tried to. The campaign couldn't do this, so I tried to get it done surreptitiously through about 5 or 6 different channels. There were what?
They did. They had. I mean, it depended on the day. But young in their 20s, and they were doing this a lot of time. But there was still an aversion to it.
There were actually times when we had too many people at the bus stops, where they were kind of almost. We would have 15, 20, 30 people, of all ages and all races. People came from the South Side. African American Mustache Campaign would come and meet us on North Side L stops, and it almost became a problem. People couldn't walk through. We'll show you a 30-second or 60-second spot we did later that has some of the footage from some of that. So this is kind of what we inherited. You can see Garcia is very big. This is a font a banker would typically use, or a lawyer would. It's called copperplate. I think this was done by his son, Chava. Here's another one where Garcia is big, and we got the 4 stars of the Chicago flag. The blue is very hard to see at a distance. So what are we going to do with Chuy's identity? Well, we take Jesus Garcia became Chuy, and Garcia for Chicago, which was the original URL, we changed it to Chicago for Chuy to try to give people the sense that this is a movement behind a guy, not a guy who wanted to serve a city. This is typical. Both of us have had commercial agencies for $1 billion. Well, not quite $1 billion, but lots of money. And so even though I've worked on political campaigns, I was labor organizer in my 20s. I was an anti-war activist since 1981. I've had my own commercial company doing this kind of stuff. So we had not, even though I did this type of thing in the Herald Washington campaign, we had not had this much power within a campaign. So we had we applied some traditional branding methods and design principles, that type of thing, which is part of what we're going to show you today. So this is our first attempt at rebranding. So we made the Chuy bigger. We added a check mark because we wanted people to take action. We started thinking it was, checking something on a ballot, but then we realized we should not make it an X, because that's negative, not a check in a ballot box. We want it to be not just it's a movement, it's out of an office, it's canvassing, it's calling, it's stuff like that. We weren't happy with this for a variety of reasons. We only made 2 or 3 buttons like this as a test. We decided the Chuy the check mark was not very well done, and we needed to incorporate more of the Chicago identity. And so we ended up with this. So you've got a check mark between 2 Chicago stars. Chuy's big. It's a Google font. So we dropped the Jesus. We actually hand edited. We converted the check mark to an outline, hand edited it until we got it to work well in the position. We used the stars from the flag. We adopted the flag. We had to darken the blue a little bit. It's the same hue, but we darkened it a little bit. We used readily available Google fonts, Roboto, so that anyone producing peripheral materials easily get the fonts. And the italic is Georgia italic, which most designers just hate, like the first serif font, Google, that became kind of a standard. But in this case, it's a little heavier than normal. It has a genuine italic. It works well. Anyone can get it. Most people have it on their computer anyway. So it works just fine. Also, you can see the button, you know, right away. And it was extensible. So we had buttons. Clem Balinoff kept calling me every 3 days and said, "Can we get a button?" So this was for our South grade. We replaced stars with shamrock. Stand with the stash became a hashtag, and so we started adding mustaches to everything. And women would get. Evelyn, his wife, started carrying paste-on mustaches with her, and she'd give them to a bunch of women, and then women would get around Chuy and put mustaches on and take selfies, and this became a real meme. This is the Irish mustache button. We're not going to show you all the buttons. There are 12 or 14 buttons that were eventually in. But as you can see, the mark, the Chuy, the stars, and the dash. Once you and the check, once you have that means anything. Brand, as long as you use that mark, that combination, it pretty much brands as with a Chuy identity. So this here was actually we approached the Harold Washington commission. It's kind of a historical commission that kind of protects the Harold Washington brand. We said, "Do you mind if we do a button that looks like the original Harold Washington button?" So we did this. And then we did a darker version. People used the original light blue color from Harold Washington's. They thought it was too light, so we made a darker version. This is your LGBT button. This is the first one. We made two variations. This is the first. This is the second one. The second one was much more popular, more stylish, and much higher demand. They disappeared almost immediately. And here's the basic button. Now, notice that this doesn't have any mustache, what it actually looks like. And we did some issues. So red light cameras are basically a regressive tax on low-income people. They tend to put red light cameras in low-income neighborhoods. They don't put them in the loop. They don't tend to put them in higher-income neighborhoods. And the tickets are expensive. And if you don't pay them within, 30 days, they double. Another 30 days, they double again. So a lot of families were having to make a decision between putting food on the table or paying rent or paying their red light tickets. This is something that Emanuel did instead of raising property taxes. He actually proposed a $3 million property tax increase, but Governor Quinn, during the election, decided that Democrats shouldn't be proposing a tax, so he talked Emanuel into these series of regressive taxes like on red light cameras, parking meter fees, all this. Also, we did window signs, lawn signs, banners, all kinds of stuff. And again, very consistent. We really fought to get the hashtag in there, Chuy 2015, and the website address, because these appear in the media all the time, and you want people to be able to immediately find. You can use this pretty much any social media. Here's an example of signs in use. That was on the election night. You want to talk about this?
Yeah, so we also tried to carry the branding over into social and email and any other channel we were doing. So if we were going to do a simple share image or something on Facebook, we would also include the button there too, so it was easy to put into there, and then
the colors and the stars.
Yeah,
also.
Colors, stars for the field office. And then we also wanted to make sure that when people, can you go to the next one, Paul? When people shared things from the website, usually it's just Facebook is just going to pull a header image or whatever file is in there, but you can control that. So we made sure that each issue page had a custom graphic, and then it had the important information. So whether it was register, vote early, vote on, or if it was sign up event, when people were just sharing that organically, it was obvious they knew it was for Chuy as well.
So this is a real basic to make your easy. Just have consistent branding, consistent colors, and a consistent, readily available font. It makes it really easy. You can do everything extremely quickly. It makes it much less expensive. Makes people who are not experienced less likely to mistake. So it's a basic principle. Start with what you know. So we know what the font is. We know how Chuy we know what the color palette is, and we know we're going to have a check and some stars. So whatever you can do that type of thing. And also we used, on the website, we used the Chuy button as, we'll go into some detail here about that. But we used the colors and the, all that kind of stuff. Talk a little bit about the website. We knew that Chuy was going to be attacked for not capable of running a big city like Chicago. In some sense, it's racist, right? A Mexican is not sophisticated enough to run the city. And so we deliberately made Chuy's website more corporate than Rom's website. Extremely clean, strict grid throughout. Swiss, any of your designers, a Swiss style design, which really goes back to the 50s. So very limited palette based on the button colors. Virtually every color was black, white, gray, or the palette colors. And we used the circle, the button. So we set up a grid that was all rectangles, vertical, horizontal, but then the button was a circle that violated the grid, basically. So you have a circular. It always works if you have rectangles in a circle. I mean, you can't go wrong with that. So the main thing in the upper left-hand corner is the Chuy button, basically, but we use circles. Here's how we started. Let's see. Billy Belchev, who wasn't able to be here today, he did most of the work on the website, and he started by an ActBlue account early on. And if you have an ActBlue account, you can look at the most successful websites in the last 3 months or 4 months. And so we looked at the top 10 websites around the country in terms of raising money, and we adopted many of their practices. So we didn't try to be original. We did things that had already worked. In early on web design, the reason you have navigation on a top bar is design had navigation on a top bar, and everyone how to use that. It's like if you're driving a car, you expect the gas pedal to be on the right and the brake to be on the left. It might be a lot more efficient to put the gas on the left and the brake pedal on the right, but if you did it, you wouldn't sell any cars, right? And people wouldn't know how to use the car. So we're trying to use things that we know worked through ActBlue. So one thing we noticed is almost is the word contribute instead of donate. We kind of wanted to do, we also worked on Obama 2000. We had a big fight with the Obama staff on which word to use, but here we are, so donate is like giving to a charity, contribute is helping. It worked better. We wanted to, we had contribute on the top of interior pages also. We had it on every page in the footer. Wanted to give people every opportunity to contribute money. And the website did make a lot of money, even more than the email fundraising that we did. We got, towards the end of the campaign, where we get between $15,000 and $30,000 a day in donations. And the majority of that was coming just from people who come to the website, saw the donate button, or the contribute button, and made a contribution. We also, used a cookie so we could identify readers who are already on our mailing list. And so it's called progressive engagement. So if we knew you had already signed up for the mailing list, form to volunteer. If we knew you'd already signed up for the mailing list and the volunteer, we gave you a more sophisticated form. So if you know stuff about each person and use cookie to track them, you can be intelligent. Don't you hate it when you've already signed up to for an email list and they keep putting a splash page that asks you to keep signing up over and over again? Makes no sense. And then we all the contribute buttons with reference codes, so we knew what donation came from every button that people clicked on, contribute button that people clicked on throughout the website, and we used that kind of to see where most of the money was coming from. Were they waiting until they read all the way through the bottom of the page? Were they contributing right at the top? Or were they using one in the top navigation bar? And that allowed us to make some slight variations in the design. So we researched ActBlue sites. We used the circle theme throughout. You can see we've got icons representing different types of content in circles. And we had sign-up forms and volunteer forms on every internal page. This, again, was a practice that we saw in a lot of the successful ActView. So this is see on the higher minimum wage where you can sign up right there. Say, I'm with Chuy. Who did you come up with it? Who came up with that phrase? And again, it goes along with the idea of he's leading a movement. Ram adopted this with about 3 weeks left in the campaign. Now it became Ram. I'm with Ram. He adopted a whole bunch of stuff that we did during his campaign. We added, and then eventually we added some color. And we ended up, I'm going to show you from top to bottom. This is the last day of the campaign. So it's not a real positive thing, but it gives you an idea of how the whole layout was done. And this is a example of a use for the website. So the website, we're going to show you some videos and talk about video campaigns, but we made a lot of videos that were on specific issues. We supported the places. Uh-oh. I'm violated.
It is not. You can turn that off. So I can say, so just making sure that we use it is someone from the, we use the website to actually integrate any other type of campaign. A formula that we used was we did a number of videos, and we're going to talk about that in a second. We produced over 30 of these videos that were kind of testimonials or just discussing the issues. We would take that once the video was done, and we would write some kind of press release about it, try to make it into a news event, have that actual physical event in the real world, and then drive people back to the site and try to make news so we could be quoted as the source instead of having other people quote the Tribune and the Sun-Times, because as Paul mentioned, they were very supportive of Ram. So this is an example of something that we did in anticipation of one of the debates. We wanted to say, okay, well, here's Emmanuel had a series of commercials at the beginning of the campaign about the tough decisions that he made, all these things. He said that one of the commercials was about him making the tough decision to raise the minimum wage, which hadn't actually happened. He did raise it, but it hadn't gone into effect, and he had someone telling a story about how they could now buy their child Christmas because they had all this extra money, which wouldn't take and go into effect until 2019.
On the four-year layaway plan, apparently.
So we used, this is taking his tough decisions, what he actually says, and then giving the reality, and it was connected to a video of a principal that is very outspoken on education in Chicago, actually giving more detailed responses on why all of these things are not factually accurate and what his experience with those issues were. So that's a formula that we kind of applied throughout the campaign.
This is actually one of the best. I was involved in debate prep for Chuy, and Chuy did poorly in the first debate. He did okay in the second debate. After the second debate, I actually went through and I looked at the last, and then we asked we wanted the press to be inoculated. Any of you who've been involved in organizing know what inoculation is? How many don't know what inoculation is? Okay, it's basically if you're organizing a union, you have a series of house meetings, that type of thing. You get your core supporters together, and eventually you get a fair right before you collect enough the cards. Basically. Lawyers always say exactly the same things. They call meetings, they say exactly the same things. They hire consultants. Some of the consultants have gone over to the other side and told, say, so you basically prepare the workers so that when the employers come in and threaten them, it's just like a inoculation against a disease. So we wanted to inoculate the press so they would start asking hard questions, because every one of Rahm's points was bullshit. Along with that, we had a really good principal who was a leader in the progressive education reform movement, Troy LaRaviere. But he had made a video a week or two. It was the first video we did before this that touched on many of these points. So he had a detailed analysis with data to refute much of Rahm's stuff. So we made the video, we released his video, we released this press release. It got a lot. Some of the relatively conservative columnists in the newspaper said, you got to see this video. Received our press release, and it did change. It helped Chuy, it helped the campaign respond, but it also helped inoculate the media, and we did much, much better in the third debate. So we'll show you some of, this is the first, Troy LaRaviere. Anyone's been involved in education probably knows who he is. He's extremely active in Chicago. His blog post has been picked up by Dan Ravitch, who's one of the figures. He was just by the Washington Post, and the article reviewed was the #1 article for a whole day on the Washington Post about Park. He's principal at the second high through 8 school in Chicago, so it's really hard for them to fire him or attack him. And they put a system to actually hire a principal, and so he has a contract. So to fire him, violating that contract, and he's so anyway.
Rahm had what did he end up with? $30-40 million to our in the runoff too. I think it was like 20 something to 1.3 million. So Rahm grossly overspent us, and we knew that from the beginning. So we tried to make the push to have social media and specifically Facebook be our TV, because it was the easiest way for us to reach specific audiences with small budgets and reach people that we knew were likely to vote for us or likely to care. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we did there. So the approach we took was, and if any of you guys do marketing, you probably know when you're doing any kind of social or online, there's infinite ways that you can measure if you're successful or not. There's repins, retweets, likes, shares, regrams, all of these different things. At the end of the day, I think the only two things that actually mattered for this campaign was us pushing people back to the website, so driving traffic. And that is important because we wanted volunteers, we wanted donations, we wanted people to see the press releases that we were writing, we wanted people to see the issues and understand more about Chuy. And then the other part was reaching new audiences. So making sure that we're identifying people that we think could be likely voters or we think we could persuade, and reaching them. So always increasing the awareness. So we didn't really focus on Facebook or Twitter or anything else, any other social channel for anything but those two objectives.
So this is a key point, and we had to argue with people in the campaign. It's really easy to just be talking to 30 or 40, 50 people, but it doesn't do the campaign any. The point is to reach people who you've never reached before, and that needs to be your #1 objective in pretty much everything you do.
And so Twitter specifically, decision to, but with user-generated supporters, we had pretty active Twitter. But for the campaign, I made a decision to not have it be an active focus because it was an echo chamber. 15 or 20 people retweeted their same audiences that were already in the political know in Chicago, and we need to do any convincing them. So when we have limited time, you have to go elsewhere. So unlimited time and money. And so website traffic. So this is just some of the leading sources of traffic. So the main point here is that Facebook was overwhelmingly the leading. Twitter didn't really much, organic, direct, email, all the organic goes up as it goes on. But Facebook really was a source of traffic. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the ways able to do that.
The really light blue, which you might not be able to read, is organic traffic.
Direct is coming. So that's someone searching, for Chuy, some variation. These are all just to show that social was a driver of traffic. It was the primary driver. So the organic would be lots of just long tail search. So Jesus Garcia, Chuy Garcia, all of the different search terms, and then people clicking on the result as opposed to going direct to the site. No, that's fine. Go ahead.
So first, I want to thank you guys for the great work you did on the historic campaign. I think it's something that everyone needs to look at when you get to electoral battleground in Seattle. This is something Occupy Party did. Bruce Dixon wrote an interesting analysis on Black Agenda, talking about how one of the number one factors sealing Chuy's fate was that all Black Democrats from Obama on down endorsed Ron. Well, I'm not wrong.
That's not true. No.
In that they all Black majority wards went to Ron, even by small margins. That obviously, those are deep questions we have. Also, that, and then he even had some critiques of the campaign, saying that there could have been a voter drive in Black Chicago, speaking more to issues that would really set the community on fire, talking more from the beginning about the racism in Chicago police and culture victims.
Well, in Chicago, this is a issue. It has many. We expected to get about 50% of the black vote. We got like 46 to 45 to 48%, something like that. Well, it has historical roots. If you really want to hear about it, we'll talk. No, there's Chicago-specific reasons. So after Harold Washington, Richard M. Daley ran for mayor, and he won. And when he won, he wanted to. The Latinos had been progressive Latino aldermen had been effective supporting progressive policies. He wanted to get rid of them, so he established the HDO, the Hispanic Democratic Coalition, and they fought against guys like Chuy and 2 or 3 of the Latino aldermen, and they defeated most of them. Chuy was a defeated senator then, but he was defeated. And one thing that they did is to divide the races. They gave lots of jobs, and you're seeing Latinos working on the garbage trucks, digging the street, repairing the potholes. There's always been this kind of divide between Latinos, but that convinced blacks Latinos were stealing their jobs, and many blacks didn't know that. This divide and conquer thing's been going on for 100 years. It was done in Detroit in the auto plants, and so So I actually did some informal research. I called them. Andy and I did an experiment on African American single mothers, and
That was an audience we wanted to.
we thought they were, and 9 out of the 10 of the comments we got were horrible. Never vote for that guy. I asked a bunch of my friends, who are mostly male, have you been having? But what's the meaning? And their theories were, a lot of black women who are raising kids by themselves. They were pointing to Obama as an example of what their kids could do. Rahm worked for Obama. Rahm came. First time, he got huge percentage of the black vote. And this time, even though Rahm had closed the schools and stuff, to vote for Chuy would be a denial. You've already invested so much money, or just so much of your own personal energy in Obama. And to vote for Chuy would be saying you made a mistake. So I think we don't know, no, we're never going to know for sure, but we had 70,000 calls to people around Chicago, probably 30,000 into the black community. Our pluses were much higher from those calls. We know historically that blacks in Chicago like to tell who they're voting for, especially if it's not an African American on the other end. But even when we had a call center with 40 African Americans calling, sponsored by CTU, they called probably 20,000 people, and walked. He spent 4 hours a few days before the election, going from door to door, knocking on just pluses, and a single plus told them that they were undecided. All right, so they weren't telling the truth to the people calling, or they had changed. So that there's some really complex stuff going, but I think it's this black brown turnout in the community. We were doing extremely well. African Americans under 45 or 50, most of them didn't turn out. We're doing very poorly. Ones above 60, them turned out. They're some of the highest voters in the whole city. Even the Harold Washington stuff, they also remember HDO. They remember all this kind of thing. Well, that's a really complex question, because African Americans were saying we weren't emphasizing Harold enough, and white supporters were saying we were emphasizing him too much. We tried to walk. It didn't work with African Americans. We got pretty high working class white vote, even from some Tea Party types. Strangely enough, we kind of a class fight. Successful there, but it didn't. That class struggle aspect didn't resonate in African American community. Fundraiser.
Yeah, fundraiser.
Well, in Illinois, Obama was not real progressive. He was one of the few state senators who was endorsed by the Tribune. And he defeated some much more progressive candidates in local elections. Well, he's a fantastic. Well, Rahm had real skills. He's a fantastic fundraiser, and he knows lots of people. He's whether you agree with him or not politically, he's a hard-nosed tactician. He's a butt kicker, all that kind of. And I think, right. Oh, only 5 minutes. Okay. Go ahead.
Burned through a lot of this, but there's some redundant stuff. So the way that we drove traffic is basically the overview is if you just our news, we found that they didn't work well. So if we were linking to other sites about just straight issues, it worked. We didn't get good organic reach. We didn't get, and we weren't getting. So we just tried to be creative. Since we didn't have that big a budget. So we did lots of campaigns like this. This was a collect all buttons, but it was just an affiliate program site. And if you got 7 friends to join the movement, then you would get all. We were able to get in for 800 emails, little things. So if you want to keep going, one for the fight for 15. So Chuy did an endorsement, and this was you could stand with Chuy. So page, and it just had said, stand up for, stand with Chuy in the fight for 15, same thing, and you got a custom link, and you could invite friends.
That means we could track people and know where they came from.
So we knew who were the most active people, and if they invited their friends, they actually signed up. So we had some intelligence there. A stories drive where you could submit stories, and we'd showcase them about your experience in Chicago. So very similar things.
Yeah, this was when Rom imitated this towards the end also.
And then we also played with the mustache. This was a years, so it was just an ad hoc thing, and we had some printouts of festive mustaches, formal mustaches, female mustaches, just different things that people could print out and make their own. But that being good because we required people to come and download something from the site, so we got people to be more active and
They got their
browse
kit
more.
they could print out
Yeah.
and use, and their cats and stuff like that.
So here's just, I'd said that, traffic and reaching new people were the only two things that we cared about. So some things.
If there's one thing you want to remember, it's these slides we're going to show you here.
Yeah. So there's, when you're posting things, we talked about echo chamber. There's this, in Facebook Insights, you can go and you can, when you look at all the posts, you can see fans versus non-fans. So that means how many people in your audience did you reach that already are connected to you versus how many people are outside of that. And so when we did things like on the left, which these are the same exact issue, which is just linking people to Chuy's plan for, and it has a quote, it has something that Chuy had said in the debate. You can see that it's a pretty small community. It stays within the world of our 20-some thousand fans. At this point, it was probably closer to 15. This video, which this is a retired police sergeant who was explaining community policing and how that actually could be beneficial and how Chicago has de-invested in that over the manual administration and part of Daley too. You can see that the numbers are pretty stark. So the 27,000 people they weren't already. So we're expanding our reach about people that care. And that happens, it's more shareable. It also
It's new. You don't want to just parrot what's in the news. You parrot stuff people. There's actually new here that adds to the debate, and that
Original
always
content.
does much better. So it's important to think about these in any kind of campaign about this angle.
And video does perform really well on Facebook right now because they're wanting to make sure that those are served
It's
more
cheap-
than text
cheap,
posts. So if you go to the next, it doesn't have to be video though. So here's an example of how pay to play, which Paul mentioned earlier, Emmanuel has a small group of big donors that have had kickbacks. So here's a post on pay to play, which is just a link post versus a graphic that we made that we had this recurring theme that was like it's a high stakes game. So a casino cards with the different that had taken or they were more, so they were reaching new audiences. And it doesn't take that long. These things are, a lot of times people don't want to put effort into designing these because it is disposable. If you spend, 30 minutes, 40 minutes able to reach, a multiplier of, usually we were getting, 5 times more reach on these types of posts, then it's definitely worth it.
We also had a variation of the pay-to-play graphic was used at a press conference. There were photos in all the newspapers online, that kind of thing. So it's extensible in other media also if you have things that the press finds interesting.
And last example is TIFF. People all mentioned at the beginning, it wasn't a huge issue according to our polling that people care about. It's also a complex issue. So we had some county clerk, but he does a lot of research and tracking where TIF dollars are allocated. We had him do short, like 2-minute explanation versus encouraging people to go read. So when we didn't have a huge budget, so we did do a lot of paid advertising on social, but the budget was still relatively small. We spent like $15,000 through the whole campaign. But we did have a pretty good and well-organized organic outreach community. So these are examples. These are just people that had started pages on their own. So there's the Fire for Chuy, Women for Chuy, Network for Chuy. So all these had their own. They had their own voice. But we made sure that we connected with them. Just put in the groundwork that we could share with them, and we had groups and we had email lists and different ways that we could communicate. And send them messages, so we had a way to get out, to get some earned media without having to always pay for it.
private groups like the badass teachers, the badass parents, the city workers. So anything we did related to pensions, they immediately knew about it. It had reached their entire groups at no cost to us.
Go through this. In the paid reach, this is you can see this blurred out, but these are addresses. These are likely voters. So using data from Catalyst and the van stuff that we were collecting in the field, we of the addresses of had voted in the previous 2 elections, and they had voted Democrat. And this is a Latino list, but we had African American lists and we had white lists too. And so we matched those with users on Facebook using custom audiences. So I had an audience of this list 5,000 and it matched around 70,000 on Facebook. And then I could layer my age range, or I could break it down by interests if it was something about education. So that was an effective way that we were able to.
A little more detail. The way this worked is as we would do calling, we'd do door knocking, we would identify our pluses. Then we would do those pluses. We'd try to do what they call a fingerprint among the entire voter files to figure out what are the, is it African American women with kids? Is it white? All this kind of stuff. And then we would run. We actually run queries on the voters in many cases with an eye to sending specific messages specific of those audiences.
So keep going through. And we did a number of other things too. It wasn't always. We also did interest groups. So I had some of people that were connected to unions that I broke down by age range and other. We had people that were, depending on the issue, it could be a number. I had some social justice too. But if you use Facebook, if you're running Facebook as and you use Power Editor and you come up with an audience that works, you can just say, use that over and over to do a lot of the legwork. We also had some success with, we tried video ads everywhere because we made so many videos. Twitter did not work very well. It was very expensive. I was paying like $1.30. $1.75 sometimes, kind of expensive. Where on Facebook, I was getting 1 cent, 2 cent. Twitter is still, I think they're still working some things out, but YouTube did work well with us. And the targeting we did there was through the display network or site someone's going to. So I picked sites that I thought a specific demographic to visit for those audiences. Really high in the, we did language videos. We had really high view through rates. So we had 40% of the people
to the end
is unheard of. Usually, on Facebook, I think the norm is that you get about 8 seconds. We were getting usually 20 seconds of a view. That was the bulk of the view. So I think we were doing pretty well.
We're gonna have to rush through
we'll
some of this
probably
stuff.
go through. Anyway, the message, it wasn't just us creating people. If social and marketing determined the election, we probably would have won. We had a much bigger share of voice than Rom did. He didn't have any real supporters. He had some trolls that he was paying, but a lot of the stuff was being submitted about him anyway. But we had all types of things, artists that were making custom Chuy food and distributing it throughout the city. And we also had a lot of pets that were marching. So we learned some interesting stuff here that supported Chuy more than cats.
Much more. Yeah.
So we don't know why. That's so video was. Don't have time. We're not gonna have time to show any of these, but we can share links if anyone's interested. Video was a big part of our social, just because you get better reach, you get better engagement, and it's like Paul said, it's more original content. So we made 33 videos throughout the campaign. Are somewhat formulaic, but since we were introducing Chuy, since he wasn't well known at the beginning, we had surrogates talk about the issues for him and introduce his stance on those and his history before we introduced Chuy.
Unscripted. We'd spend 2 hours in the studio and then 2 hours editing. So generally spend more than 4 hours on each video.
So I think
yeah.
we were in a video today, and one of the don't try to make people that aren't actors. And so we took that. We did the same thing. We let people just share their story. So we had with the Patrick Fitzmorris. If anyone knew who he was, he's a paramedic field chief in Chicago, and interesting thoughts on the increase in violence, just because to a lot of that stuff. So we made a number of videos with him, and just by asking him questions, he was able to come up with amazing taglines and ways of framing issues that us been able to come up with those because it's real as us as it is to him. So we use that to our advantage, and we just made sure that we're asking the right questions and then editing it down, and a lot of that stuff trickled in on the messaging staff, seeing that and then giving it to and having it be in press releases and having it be on literature. So it was a formula that we used, but it also allowed us to make more diverse spots because we had all that hours and hours of footage that we could piece together if we needed to make anything.
I think we're pretty much out of time. Is that right? You kind of shrugged your shoulders.
Yeah, so we don't have sound anyway, but we can, like I said, we can beginning. So we're talking about closings and how their kids were, teachers that were talking. We had people that we had the retired police officer. We had Patrick
On community policing.
Yeah, so we all of the big issues that we knew we tried to find are going to be much more suitable to talk about it, and they could talk to a larger audience in Chicago.
Well, we have to show you the last slide here. It's we didn't have time to go cut and dried, but this example of our field canine corps here.
So we're happy to answer questions, and we'll be around for the rest of the. No relation to her. Random. I mean, there was so much of. If you just search Chuy 2015 on Twitter,
By us or by supporters, no clip art, no nothing. You know, we have probably 10,000 photos.
Design mustache with the buttons. Were you looking to make something memeable? Were you to reach a younger audience? What was the mindset going into creating this kind of graphics?
so you're talking about like the shareable.
Or even like the font?
I think that he probably has a different answer, but my opinion is that when things look more put together, like their experience, it's always more sticky. So some people say there's the benefit to making things. I think a cat video, and people don't care about that. It doesn't impact. That's why we put a lot of effort into making specific. There were multiple groups that definitely were patrol that we passively participated. Something we would give them like, hey, this is an interesting topic, but we wouldn't be making it. We didn't put out a lot of just strictly negative. This is wrong, but we didn't do any like attack memes on our own or anything like that. So surrogates, we're doing that. But when you look at the numbers, our stuff was all shareable. The pause experience always trumps me.
Not only clobbered Rom social stats, the social media experts rated us way above Rom and the other, both during the general election and during the runoff election. Whether that means anything, that's another question. But
they needed something to talk about on the news, so they decided to analyze the marketing efforts.
Sort of linked to this question, but the idea of bringing in the mustache is like bringing humor into the
no, that wasn't our idea. That actually came from the guys in the teacher. Yeah, he was actually one of the most active during the school closings. We interviewed him, did a video with him also, but he liked the mustache idea. I think someone gave him some art and he refined it, and then he did his own mustache with a Chicago flag theme, and became really popular. And so we had, I don't know if it was exactly that mustache, but something very similar. Plus, the mustache doesn't look at all like shit. But that didn't matter. No, it didn't matter. Oh no, oh no.
I think we didn't. So that's the mustache campaign. That was early on, and it was kind of just an engagement post because we didn't have anything else to talk. There's a lot of time, even in a short period. We were only 4 months. There's still like, okay, well, what are we going? So we used the mustache in situations like that, but we never attached it to anything serious. And the last month of the campaign, when it was more of a Chuy versus Rom thing, it was part of the movement by that point. So you still saw it at events and the stickers and people having them on little sticks with that was happening, but we didn't have to long anymore.
It was funny to see women with mustaches and kids with mustaches and dogs and cats. And here I'll find that there's a news box in here. Oh, right here, the lower left-hand corner, some mustache in one of the newspaper vending boxes. We had, I mean, it really was a movement from artists, from musicians. We had 3 corridos, which is a ballad. One of the leading Chicago Mexican-American musicians, a woman who actually helped us with the campaign and made us and did some translations, and we had a man who did his own corrido. So people are looking for something. Hopefully, we can keep what we're talking about now, the movement going. And if you do get money, do you have, whoever pays the piper calls the tune, and they start calling it a tune, you can't get anyone around.
Of education related, and me personally, I know about it from reading and from talking with Paul involved in education.
I've been
reform.
active for years, gone to the NP conferences and all that stuff, so I knew a lot of the people.
But me being able to just have easy access, like I do have a teacher that can talk about inflated graduation around manual, and they're like, here's 4 people and here are their phone numbers, and we know that they're already in all this stuff. Vetting me can not relationships on my own was most beneficial. I just had instant access to all of that because they're well,
they had it in talk directly too, which made things a little. Sometimes we were trying to get a subject for a video, and they were trying to get them, but we couldn't talk to each other about it. That type of thing. Obviously, very important in terms of giving us money, especially for the runoff. They and the ATU were about the only people who gave us money initially. We were trying to general campaign, and the CTU largely education, African American oriented campaign. There were definitely conflicts there. They were supplying a lot of the money. We had to do things differently than we normally would. Mm-hmm. The point is to win, right? And we did 4.5 out of 10 votes. That's the way I look at it, which is not bad for an underfunded. Only 30% of the people knew who he was when we started, so that's not bad. Well, that's one reason we came here. I've been involved in movements since I was in high school, and if you had a draft, you would have movements. If people are being sent to Iraq and places like that, you'd have tremendous movement. It's a really complex issue, and in Chicago, you kind of have movement. We're not necessarily connected to the sort of people who came out to support Chuy. So it's you have kind of the official leftists and the middle class and white, and then you have kind of the working class come up out of the woodwork. And to have any real steam, you've got to have, hopefully it's union driven, but on the other hand, you have some pretty conservative union people who decided that Rom was their buddy. we're trying to figure that out right now. And how do you finance something like that? Chuy wants to keep it going if he possibly can. He may. We heard rumors he's going to the Democratic National Convention, which would help. The Democrats want to get Latino votes, and he's very well known nationally now among Latinos. If you could answer that question, there are lots and lots of races. It's always better to win than lose. You can sustain one loss, 2 or 3 very detrimental. And American society, conservatives depend on people kind of being and not talking to each other. And that's the way most of American society is. To get a movement together is kind of violate the social norms of people working together, common good. When I was in the 50s and 60s, it was pretty common. You know, the tax rate for millionaire, anyone who made more than $1 million a year, the tax rate above that $1 million was 90%, and everyone thought that was just fine. The Republicans usually gotten it down to paying about 17% typically now. No one seems to care. You know, they're successful at drowning government in the bathtub, which they've been for 40 years, and it's been working really well. I don't know how we build a movement. You know, we got Billionaires United, which makes it really difficult to win elections like this. In New York, at least, you have good campaign financing laws, the city election, but really difficult. It requires a crisis. We had a movement after the Vietnam War because drafted, and see voter turnout. You know, I was in Chicago at the time. We had the 68 Convention, organized that. We were involved in SDS and all these different. We could get 100,000 people on the streets in 24 hours. You know, because you're going to be drafted. You're going to die and go kill people you didn't want to kill, right? It's lower class people who are fighting our foreign wars. Then, you know, so I don't know. We need issues that people actually organize around. And unions have been going, you know, except for the public unions, the union participation has been declining since the 60s. Early 70s. Yeah, go ahead. We talked with them, yeah, and yeah, yeah. We had informal conversations with Charles and some of the people who are involved in the Teach Out campaign, and I mean, they had a very lean campaign also, right? We tried to learn as much as we could, but we only had like 3 weeks going into the runoff, so we had to. I mean, we were working. I haven't had a day off since November 11th. 15 hours a day, 7 days a week until the weeks, you know. So you don't have much time to do anything but work. You get a call at 6:30 in the morning, and when you're in bed, you work until midnight or 2 in the morning editing videos or whatever, day after day after day. Thank you. Mm-hmm. You can get some buttons here. Just one. You know, Irish get priority. Very nice. Charles doesn't get